Alix Tichelman. We often imagine danger as something easy to spot: darkness, menace, a warning written on the face. But what happens when the threat arrives in beauty, charm, and luxury? When fantasy becomes fatal, and the person selling escape turns out to be the architect of death? And what if, when the body is found, that same person insists it was all a tragic accident that spun beyond control? On the morning of November 23, 2013, the captain of a yacht named Escape discovered the body of Forrest Timothy Hayes. Hayes was a 51-year-old married father of 5 and a respected Google executive. He had died from a heroin overdose. 2 wine glasses on board suggested company. When investigators checked the yacht surveillance footage, they saw that Hayes had been with a young woman, 26-year-old Alix Tichelman, an aspiring model and makeup artist. Alix had spent her early years in Canada before moving to Georgia. She was striking, tattooed, and known for a dark allure that drew people in. Friends said she struggled with trauma and heroin addiction. Before meeting Hayes, she lived with Dean Riopel, a nightclub owner and former rock singer. In September 2013, she called 911, reporting that Riopel had overdosed. She said she tried to revive him but failed. His death was ruled accidental, and she faced no charges. Afterward, Alix moved to Northern California and joined the sugar dating website Seeking Arrangement, where she met wealthy men for thousands of dollars per date. Police later described her as a high-end escort living in Folsom. Hayes had met her through that site. Their first encounter was uneventful. The second, aboard his yacht in Santa Cruz Harbor, would end in tragedy. Security footage revealed much of what happened. The video showed Alix preparing heroin and injecting Hayes while he used his phone flashlight to guide her. Moments later, he lost consciousness. What followed divided public opinion. Police Chief Steve Clark claimed Alix appeared calm and calculating, collecting her belongings, drinking wine, and stepping over Hayes's body several times before lowering a blind and leaving the yacht. She never called 911 or sought help. Investigators also found that she later searched online for how to handle giving someone a fatal heroin dose. Alix told a different story. She said she was intoxicated and had also injected herself. To her, Hayes looked like he had only passed out. She claimed she was terrified, not indifferent, and thought he would wake up. The district attorney's office later admitted the video showed her trying briefly to wake him, contradicting some police statements. 8 months later, an undercover Santa Cruz officer contacted Alix on Seeking Arrangement and arranged a meeting at a seaside resort. When she arrived and hugged him, she felt his bulletproof vest and realized she was under arrest. On July 9, 2014, she was charged with manslaughter and prostitution in Hayes's death. Her attorneys argued that 2 consenting adults had engaged in drug use that went horribly wrong, insisting it was an accident, not murder. On May 19, 2015, Alix pleaded guilty to manslaughter, prostitution, and drug possession. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison, with credit for time served, meaning she would serve about 3. After her release in 2017, immigration officers deported her to Canada. But her story did not end there. That same year, a Georgia grand jury indicted her for distribution of heroin, distribution of oxycodone, and 2 counts of felony murder in Dean Riopel's death. The charges claimed she caused his death by giving him drugs while he was drunk. Authorities reopened the case after learning that during questioning in California, Alix had admitted providing Riopel with heroin, something she had never told police at the time of his death. Georgia officials began working with Canadian authorities to bring her back for trial. Alix denied responsibility, saying she was heartbroken that investigators linked her to Riopel's death. To prosecutors, she symbolized a deadly pattern of negligence or manipulation. To defenders, she was a troubled woman lost to addiction, who never meant to harm anyone. The truth lay somewhere between tragedy and recklessness. 2 men died in her presence. Both overdosed on heroin. Both believed they were in control. Only one person lived to face the consequences. Whether Alix Tichelman was a killer or simply someone destroyed by the same darkness she offered to others remains a question that lingers. What is certain is that two families were shattered, a glittering world of money and secrecy was exposed, and a young woman's beauty became the face of a fatal illusion, one that blurred the line between pleasure, power, and death. Aileen Wuornos. Society teaches us that danger looks a certain way. We picture killers as men hiding in the shadows, strangers with evil carved into their faces. But what happens when the predator is someone the world already dismissed as prey? What happens when a woman surviving by selling her body on the roadside becomes America's nightmare? When the men who thought they were in control end up dying instead? And what if the woman who pulled the trigger insists she was only fighting back against a lifetime of abuse, while prosecutors claim she was something far more sinister? Between 1989 and 1990, 7 men vanished along Florida's lonely highways. Their bodies were later found in wooded areas, each one shot several times with a .22 caliber pistol. The victims were Richard Mallory, 51, David Spears, 47, Charles Carskadden, 40, Troy Barres, 50, Charles Humphreys, 56, Peter Seams, 65, and Walter Antonio, 62. Ordinary men who made the same deadly decision: to pick up a hitchhiker named Aileen Wuornos. When investigators realized the killer was a woman, the story shattered every assumption about serial murder. Aileen Carol Pittman was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Her father, Leo Pittman, was a convicted child molester who killed himself in prison before she turned 14. Her mother abandoned Aileen and her brother Keith to their grandparents when she was still a toddler. That home was no rescue. She later claimed her grandfather beat and sexually violated her, and that she had an incestuous relationship with her brother. At 14, she was raped by a friend of her grandfather, became pregnant, and gave birth at a home for unwed mothers in 1971. The baby was immediately placed for adoption. By 15, she was thrown out of the house. Alone and desperate, she survived by exchanging sex for food and money, sleeping in abandoned cars, and learning that love always came with pain. In 1976, Aileen briefly married a wealthy 70-year-old man named Louis Fell. The marriage collapsed after she assaulted him with his own cane. She wandered for years, constantly in trouble for theft, fraud, and prostitution. Then, in June 1986, she met 24-year-old Tyria Moore in a Daytona Beach bar. For Aileen, Tyria became the only person who made her feel alive. Aileen worked the highways, while Tyria stayed behind. Their relationship was intense and obsessive. Aileen's need to protect her lover would one day seal her fate. The killings began in late November 1989, when Richard Mallory picked her up on a stormy night. Aileen claimed he attacked her and that she shot him in self-defense. Over the next 12 months, 6 more men were found dead, all killed in the same way. She said every death was an act of survival. The state said it was cold-blooded murder and robbery. In July 1990, Aileen and Tyria crashed a car that belonged to one of the victims. Witnesses saw 2 women fleeing, and fingerprints later tied Aileen to pawned items from the dead men. Police arrested her in January 1991 at a biker bar called The Last Resort. Tyria agreed to cooperate. In a recorded phone call, she begged Aileen to confess so she would not go to jail. Aileen, desperate to save her, admitted everything. Her trial began in January 1992 and drew national attention. Prosecutor John Tanner painted her as a manipulative killer who hunted men for profit. Aileen argued she had been defending herself from violent clients. Her fiery testimony revealed years of abuse, exploitation, and anger. The jury was unmoved. She was convicted of the murder of Richard Mallory and later entered no contest pleas to 5 more killings, earning 6 death sentences in total. For the next decade, she appealed but eventually gave up. She fired her lawyers, renounced her appeals, and told interviewers she wanted to die. Some saw peace in her decision. Others saw madness. On October 9th, 2002, at 9:47 in the morning, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She declined a final meal, asking only for coffee. Her final words were strange and defiant, promising she would return with Jesus on Independence Day. Cyntoia Brown. Childhood should be a sanctuary, a safe season untouched by cruelty. But what happens when that sanctuary never exists? What happens when a girl born with a damaged brain from her mother's addictions is abandoned, abused, and handed to a man who teaches her that her only worth is her body? And when that girl, at 16, pulls a trigger in a stranger's bedroom, who bears the blame? In the early hours of August 7th, 2004, Nashville police responded to a call on Mossdale Drive. Inside, they found 43-year-old real estate agent Johnny Michael Allen dead, face down on his bed with a single bullet wound to the back of his head. Within hours, officers arrested 16-year-old Cyntoia Brown. She admitted to shooting Allen, but said it was an act of fear, not malice. Cyntoia's story was tragedy before it was even life. She was born on January 29, 1988, to a mother addicted to alcohol, leaving her with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. At 8 months old, she was placed in foster care. At 2, she was adopted by Ellinette Brown, who gave her stability and love. But the scars ran deeper than affection could reach. As she grew older, she ran away, used drugs, and eventually fell under the control of a 24-year-old man known as Cutthroat. He was no boyfriend, he was a trafficker. Cyntoia later testified he beat her, raped her, and forced her into prostitution. He told her she was worthless except for the money she brought him. She had no family, no safety, no escape. On the night of August 6, 2004, he ordered her to make money. That was when she met Johnny Allen. Allen picked her up outside a Sonic drive-in and offered her $150 for sex. He drove her to his home, and what happened next would ignite one of the most debated criminal cases of modern times. Cyntoia said Allen frightened her. She saw guns, watched him stand over her repeatedly, and became convinced he meant to hurt her. Terrified, she pulled out a pistol and fired. Prosecutors saw a different story. They argued Allen was asleep when she shot him. They pointed to his body's position, the bullet's angle, and the fact that Cyntoia took his wallet, guns, and truck before leaving. To them, it was not self-defense but robbery and murder. In 2006, she was tried as an adult and convicted of aggravated robbery and first-degree murder. She received 2 life sentences and would not be eligible for parole until age 67. Her lawyers never called her to testify or introduced evidence of her neurological disorder or abuse. The jury saw only a teenage killer, not a trafficked child. Years later, filmmaker Daniel Berman released Me Facing Life, Cyntoia's story, on PBS. The documentary explored her trauma and neurological damage, changing public perception. By 2017, the hashtag #FreeCyntoiaBrown had gone viral, supported by celebrities like Rihanna, Kim Kardashian, and LeBron James, who said she had been punished instead of protected. Meanwhile, the law was changing. The Supreme Court had ruled mandatory life sentences for minors violated the Constitution, and Tennessee stopped charging minors for prostitution, recognizing them as trafficking victims. But Cyntoia remained in prison under old laws. In January 2019, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam granted her clemency. He said a sentence that long for a juvenile was unjust, especially since she had transformed her life. In prison, she earned a high school diploma, a college degree, and mentored other young women. On August 7, 2019, she walked free after 15 years at 31, under 10 years of parole with counseling, community service, and work requirements. She later married, became Cyntoia Brown Long, and began speaking about criminal justice reform and survivors of trafficking. She has expressed remorse for Johnny Allen's death and acknowledged the pain his family still carries. To many, Cyntoia is a survivor, a child failed by every system meant to protect her who acted in fear after years of violence. To others, including Allen's family, she is a murderer who escaped justice. Detective Charles Robinson wrote to the governor, claiming her act was premeditated robbery, not self-defense. Allen's loved ones say he meant to help her, not harm her. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Cyntoia was born into chaos, molded by trauma, and left to survive in a world that traded mercy for money. Johnny Allen's intentions will never be known. What remains are 2 lives shattered, and a nation still asking what justice means when innocence is lost long before the crime ever happens. Dedra Hunt. When a man manipulates, coerces, and uses violence to control a woman, we expect to see a victim. But what happens when the woman becomes a participant in murder? What happens when she pulls the trigger, recruits others to kill, and executes a teenager in a videotaped act? What if she claims she had no choice, that each act was committed under threat? In the summer of 1989, 20-year-old Dedra Michelle Hunt arrived in Daytona Beach, Florida, fleeing a childhood of neglect and abuse in New Hampshire. She found work as a bartender at Top Shots, a pool hall owned by 30-year-old Konstantinos Fotopoulos, known as Costa. Costa was a Greek immigrant married into money. His wife, Lisa, had inherited a stake in Joyland Amusement Center and carried life insurance policies worth $700,000. Costa appeared successful, but appearances were deceptive. Dedra and Costa began an affair immediately. Hunt later claimed Costa was abusive, binding her hands with coat hangers, burning her breast with cigarettes, throwing knives, and holding guns to her head. He told her he was a trained assassin with a secret club of killers. Whether these claims were true or part of her defense would dominate her case. The first murder came on October 20th, 1989. 19-year-old Kevin Ramsey, a former employee at Top Shots, knew about Costa's counterfeiting operation and the affair. Costa and Dedra lured Ramsey to an isolated rifle range, tied him to a tree, and videotaped the scene. Dedra fired 3 bullets into Ramsey's chest, then 1 into his head at point-blank range. Costa finished him off with an AK-47. Ramsey's body remained in the woods for weeks. Costa threatened Dedra that the videotape would ruin her if she ever left or spoke. Under his control, she helped plan his next target, his wife Lisa. The motive was simple. If Lisa died, Costa would inherit everything, including the life insurance. Dedra recruited others to carry out the murder. 18-year-old Brian Chase eventually agreed. On November 4th, 1989, he shot Lisa in the head. She survived, but Costa then shot Chase, staging a scene that made it appear he died defending her. Police investigated and discovered Kevin Ramsey's body, the murder videotape, the weapons, and Dedra's confession. Both she and Costa were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, conspiracy, solicitation, and burglary. In 1990, facing overwhelming evidence, Dedra pleaded guilty and waived a jury during sentencing. She was sentenced to death, one of the youngest women in Florida to receive such a penalty. In 1995, the Florida Supreme Court found her lawyer had a conflict of interest, selling her story to a television show before her plea. Her plea was withdrawn, and she was granted a new trial. In 1996, she stood trial again. Her defense painted her as a victim of abuse, terrorized by Costa. Prosecutors argued she acted out of greed, actively recruited Brian Chase, and shot Ramsey herself. Her videotaped confession revealed she knew Chase would not survive, and she urged him to complete the murder. After 6 hours, the jury found her guilty on all counts. She received life sentences with parole eligibility in 25 years for the murders and concurrent life sentences for other convictions. Costa faced his trial separately, was convicted, and sentenced to death. His sentence was never overturned. The question at the heart of Dedra Hunt's case remains unresolved. Was she a victim or a participant? She experienced abuse and terror, yet she pulled a trigger, recruited a killer, and executed a teenager. Her attorney acknowledged her trauma, but the jury decided her actions were her responsibility. As of 2025, Dedra Hunt is incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. She is in her mid-50s, having spent over 30 years behind bars. Her story has been featured in true crime documentaries and television specials, including Seduced to Slay, which explores the dynamics between her and Costa. Kevin Ramsey was 19 when executed. Brian Chase was 18 when he died. Lisa Fotopoulos survived, but she knows the people closest to her husband plotted her death. 2 families lost their sons. A wife was nearly murdered, and the woman who pulled the trigger, recruited killers, and admitted to knowing the consequences, remains behind bars. Some see a victim with no way out. Others see a woman who acted willingly in a scheme driven by greed. The videotape remains undeniable evidence of murder. Whatever the truth of her internal experience, the reality is clear. 2 young men are dead, and Dedra Hunt was there. Kelly Gissendaner. When a marriage collapses, we expect anger, lawyers, arguments over money and children. But what happens when one spouse wants everything without compromise? When a wife decides her husband must die to secure his wealth, and the man who carries out the murder testifies against her? Kelly Renee Brookshire was born on March 8, 1968, into a poor cotton farming family in Georgia. Her childhood was marked by trauma. She reported being molested by her stepfather and others, and as a high school senior, she became pregnant after a date rape. At 19, she married Jeff Banks, then later married Douglas Gissendaner, with whom she had 2 children. Douglas was devoted, responsible, and loving. Kelly, restless, racked up debt, and partied while Douglas served overseas. By 1993, they divorced, then reconciled in February of 1995. They remarried in May, separated in September, and reunited again in May of 1996. In December, they moved to Auburn, Georgia, and bought a home. Douglas believed the marriage had stabilized, unaware that Kelly had decided he would not live to see the new year. Kelly met Gregory Bruce Owen in September of 1995 during a separation. Owen, born in 1971, became infatuated with her. They had an affair, broke up, and reunited in October. By November, Kelly told co-workers she was in love with Owen and unhappy with Douglas. That month, she asked Owen how to get rid of her husband. When he suggested divorce, she refused, insisting Douglas would not leave, and she would not get his money unless he was dead. She repeatedly discussed murder until Owen agreed to help. The plan was simple and ruthless. Kelly would establish an alibi while Owen waited at the house. On the night of February 7th, 1997, she provided Owen with a nightstick and a hunting knife and left to drink with friends. When Douglas returned home, Owen forced him into his car, drove him to a remote wooded area, and, following Kelly's instructions, removed his watch and wedding ring. Owen struck Douglas in the back of the head with a nightstick, then stabbed him 8 to 10 times in the neck. Kelly arrived at the scene as he finished, checked the body, and confirmed Douglas was dead. They drove a short distance, set his car on fire, hid his body, and Kelly returned home. The next morning, she called friends and family, feigning concern. Investigators found her calm and unemotional. Suspicion grew. Kelly's affair with Owen surfaced, and under pressure, Owen confessed, implicating her. Both were arrested. Prosecutors offered a plea deal: plead guilty, accept life with 25 years before parole, and Owen agreed. Kelly rejected it, confident she could convince a jury of her innocence. Her trial began November 2nd, 1998. Owen testified that Kelly had planned the murder, refused divorce, and sought Douglas's death to secure money. A friend reported that Kelly had confessed to the murder over the phone, and a cellmate testified that Kelly tried to intimidate the friend. Her defense attacked Owen's credibility, but evidence was overwhelming. The jury found Kelly guilty on all counts and recommended death. On November 20th, 1998, she became the only woman on death row in Georgia. Kelly's sentence drew national attention because Owen, who committed the murder, received life with parole eligibility after 25 years. Former Georgia Supreme Court Chief Justice Norman Fletcher later said the death sentence was disproportionate. While in prison, Kelly underwent a transformation. She converted to Christianity, ministered to women, and completed a theology degree through Atlanta area divinity schools. She prevented suicides, encouraged inmates to change, and became a mentor. Correctional officers supported her clemency application. Her execution, initially scheduled for February 25, 2015, was delayed multiple times due to a storm and a drug storage issue. A new date was set for September 29th. Appeals failed. Though Pope Francis and tens of thousands petitioned for mercy, Kelly's daughter pleaded for her life. On September 30th, 47-year-old Kelly Gissendaner was executed at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison. She sang Amazing Grace until losing consciousness and was declared dead at 12:21 in the morning, the first woman executed in Georgia in 70 years. Kristen Rossum. When a brilliant toxicologist calls 911 to report her husband's suicide, the scene sounds almost poetic. Rose petals scattered across the bed, a wedding photograph placed beside the body. But what if that scene was staged, created by someone with knowledge of deadly substances and access to make death appear natural? What if the person trained to analyze poison used that skill to commit murder? On the evening of November 6, 2000, emergency responders arrived at a San Diego apartment to find 26-year-old Gregory DeVillers unresponsive, surrounded by red rose petals. His wife, 24-year-old Kristen Rossum, claimed she had found him after a bath, insisting he had taken his own life over marital troubles. Gregory's family, however, knew he despised drugs. He had helped Kristen overcome methamphetamine addiction, supporting her through recovery and celebrating her graduation with a degree in biochemistry. The idea he would overdose voluntarily was inconceivable. The autopsy revealed the cause of death: fentanyl, 7 times a lethal dose mixed with clonazepam and oxycodone. Kristen worked as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's office, where these drugs were stored. She had keys, knowledge, and opportunity. Investigators needed motive. Kristen had been having an affair with her boss, Dr. Michael Robertson, the forensic laboratory manager. Their relationship created tension at work. Kristen had relapsed into meth use, stealing from the lab. Gregory discovered both secrets days before his death and threatened to expose her. To Kristen, his ultimatum threatened her career, her reputation, and her relationship with Robertson. Detectives reconstructed the day of Gregory's death. Kristen called his employer, claiming he felt ill. Witnesses later stated he had made plans for the next day, inconsistent with suicidal behavior. Security records placed Kristen and Robertson together several times, engaged in emotional conversations. Circumstantial and physical evidence began forming a damning narrative. A supermarket receipt sealed her fate. Kristen purchased a single rose at 12:42 in the afternoon, the time she claimed to be at home with Gregory. She later said it was for Robertson, but the petals on Gregory's body were red. Investigators theorized the petals were a reference to the film American Beauty, reflecting a bizarre theatrical touch in a staged death. Kristen was arrested on June 25, 2001, 7 months after Gregory's death. Her parents mortgaged their home to post bail, leaving no funds for a private attorney. At trial, prosecutors argued Kristen poisoned Gregory with fentanyl from her workplace, staged the bedroom for suicide, and called 911. Her defense claimed he took the drugs himself and arranged the petals, but Gregory's brother testified this was impossible. Medical experts explained a man of Gregory's build would have been incapacitated too quickly to move or arrange petals. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict. On November 12, 2002, Kristen Rossum was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Civil suits brought by Gregory's family initially awarded $100 million, later reduced to $10 million, ensuring Kristen would never profit. Robertson, fired for failing to report her drug use and the affair, returned to Australia and was never charged, though prosecutors called him an unindicted co-conspirator. Today, Kristen remains incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility. Appeals focus on whether her attorneys properly investigated contamination of samples at the medical examiner's office. Yet the facts remain unchanged. A toxicologist used her training to commit murder. A wife became a killer. A husband who had saved her from addiction was repaid with betrayal and death. His body was arranged like a scene from cinema, not mourned as the man he had been. Pamela Smart. When a young wife discovers her husband murdered in their condominium, the scene seems familiar. A break-in, a robbery, a life stolen by a faceless intruder. But what if the broken lock and rifled drawers were theater? What if the sobbing widow was not searching for answers but trying to bury them? What if the weapon was wielded not by a stranger, but by a teenager devoted to the wife, willing to commit the unthinkable? On the evening of May 1st, 1990, 24-year-old Gregory Smart returned home to his Derry, New Hampshire condominium. Two teenage boys ambushed him. One held him down, while the other pressed a .38 caliber revolver to his head. Greg fell to his knees, begging for his life. The gun fired once. The teenagers ransacked the apartment, staging what they hoped looked like a burglary, then fled. Pamela Smart, 22, arrived later from a school board meeting, discovered the body, and called 911. Her screams seemed genuine, but her performance would not hold. Investigators soon noticed inconsistencies. No significant valuables had been taken. The forced entry looked staged, and Pamela, a media coordinator, appeared oddly composed during interviews. She seemed more concerned with public image than grief. The breakthrough came from Cecilia Pierce, a 16-year-old intern who had heard disturbing confessions from Pamela. Pierce's father contacted police. Detectives equipped her with a wire. On tape, Pamela discussed the murder in chilling detail, worrying about loose ends and making thinly veiled threats about what would happen if Pierce revealed the truth. The recordings provided leverage investigators needed. The truth led to 15-year-old William Flynn, a student at Pamela's school who had a sexual relationship with her. Flynn testified that their affair became all-consuming. Pamela represented excitement and forbidden attention. Beneath the romance was manipulation. She confided about her marriage, portraying Greg as an obstacle. She complained about money and divorce, suggesting life would be easier if he were gone. Flynn recruited 3 friends to carry out the crime. Patrick Randall held Greg down while Flynn shot him. Vance Latime Jr. drove the getaway car, and Raymond Fowler waited nearby. All 4 later testified that Pamela orchestrated the plan. She provided Greg's schedule, access to the condominium, and coached them to make it appear like a burglary. She specified Flynn shoot rather than stab, a detail both he and Randall confirmed in court. The prosecution's case rested on the teenager's testimony, secured through plea deals. Flynn, portrayed as a boy manipulated by an older woman using sex as leverage, testified in vivid detail. He described how Pamela threatened to end their relationship if he refused to kill Greg, saying he whispered, "God forgive me," before firing. The jury saw footage of Flynn, terrified and conflicted, caught between adolescent devotion and adult crime. Pamela's trial was a media sensation, one of the first to allow television cameras. Assistant Attorney General Diane Nicolosi portrayed Pamela as calculating, seducing a boy, and using his devotion to remove her husband and collect his $140,000 life insurance. Pamela admitted the affair but denied involvement in planning the murder, claiming the teenagers acted independently. The taped conversations contradicted her denials, revealing a woman attempting to contain the fallout from a plan that worked. On March 22, 1991, the jury convicted Pamela Smart of being an accomplice to murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness tampering. She was sentenced to life without parole. The teenagers received shorter sentences as part of cooperation agreements. Flynn, 28 years to life. Randall, 40 years to life. Latime, 18 years to life. And Fowler, 30 years. All have since been released. Flynn walked free in 2015 after serving 25 years. Pamela's appeals focused on her claim of innocence and the teenagers' motives. In 2024, she released a videotaped statement accepting responsibility for Greg's death, acknowledging her role in setting events in motion and confronting truths she had avoided. Critics noted she never mentioned her husband by name. Today, Pamela remains at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in New York. She earned multiple graduate degrees, including a doctorate in ministry, became an ordained minister, and tutored fellow inmates. She presents herself as rehabilitated, a far cry from the young woman who destroyed lives in 1990. But rehabilitation does not undo the past. It cannot bring back Greg Smart, nor restore the childhood stolen from the teenagers who fired the gun. Pamela Smart's case endures as a study in manipulation and its consequences, a reminder that the most dangerous weapon can be the ability to convince another to commit murder. Sante Kimes. When an elderly widow disappears from her Manhattan townhouse, the investigation should focus on obvious suspects: a disgruntled employee, an opportunistic stranger, someone in her social circle. But what if the answer was stranger? What if a tenant evading security cameras for weeks had rented the apartment under a false name? What if that tenant was part of a mother and son team whose lives were built on lies, theft, and carefully orchestrated cons? And what if the 82-year-old socialite was not missing but the latest victim in a decades-long crime spree? Irene Silverman was the kind of woman who turned heads in a city full of them. The former Radio City Music Hall Rockette married real estate developer Samuel Silverman in 1941, and together they built a life of glamour and privilege on Manhattan's Upper East Side. After Samuel's death in 1980, Irene converted their townhouse into apartment rentals, maintaining control of property worth millions, while entertaining actors and politicians. She was fiercely independent and deeply suspicious when something felt wrong. In May of 1998, something felt very wrong about her newest tenant. The man called himself Manny Guerin. He had secured the apartment through a woman named Ava Guerra, who invoked the name of one of Irene's friends to gain trust. From the moment he moved into apartment 1B in mid-June, Irene's instincts told her this tenant was trouble. He never spoke. He avoided eye contact. Most tellingly, he covered his face when passing security cameras. An older woman entered and exited at odd hours. Irene documented their strange behavior, confiding in staff and requesting they be evicted. She had no idea she was documenting her own impending murder. Manny Guerin was actually Kenneth Kimes Jr., and the older woman was his mother, Sante. They had spent months perfecting a plan to steal Irene's townhouse. They had started in Florida, confirming Irene owned the property, stealing identification documents, and creating false names and elaborate backstories. They drove north in a stolen car loaded with wigs, masks, syringes, handcuffs, and recording equipment. They moved into Irene's building with a singular focus: to take everything she owned, ensuring she could not stop them. On May 18, 2000, after 3 months of testimony, the jury returned its verdict. Sante Kimes was found guilty on 58 counts, including second-degree murder, robbery, conspiracy, forgery, and eavesdropping. Kenneth was convicted on the same charges plus 2 counts of possessing forged instruments. Both were held responsible for Irene's death, despite the absence of physical remains. Sante was sentenced to 120 years, Kenneth to 125, with no parole for either until well into the next century. California prosecutors then demanded their extradition for the murder of David Kasdan. Facing the death penalty, Kenneth confessed to killing Kasdan and provided details of Irene's murder that only the killer could know. He described tackling Irene while his mother used a stun gun, wrapping the body and disposing of it. As part of a plea agreement, he testified against Sante in California, resulting in her conviction for Kasdan's murder and adding decades to her sentence. The mother and son team, dubbed Mommy and Clyde by the press, had finally been stopped. Their crime spree had spanned decades and crossed state lines, leaving at least 2 confirmed dead and countless others victimized by fraud. Even behind bars, Kenneth remained dangerous. In October 2000, he held a reporter hostage with a pen during a jailhouse interview, underscoring the violence beneath his controlled exterior. Sante died in prison on May 19, 2014, at 79. She spent 14 years at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, without expressing remorse or revealing where Irene's remains were. Her death brought no closure to Irene's loved ones. The townhouse on East 65th Street still stands, but the woman who filled it with life was reduced to evidence in a criminal case. Kenneth remains imprisoned in California, attempting in interviews to portray himself as a victim of maternal manipulation. He speaks of understanding the evil of his actions, but recognition does not undo murder. The case of Sante and Kenneth Kimes is a testament to how family bonds can be twisted into something monstrous. Sante molded an accomplice, weaponizing maternal influence to create a partner in crime. Kenneth embraced the role his mother designed, becoming the muscle behind her schemes, and eventually the hand that ended 2 lives. Together, they left a trail of destruction across America, a reminder that the most dangerous partnerships can be those forged in blood. Tracy Richter. When a mother kills an intruder while protecting her 3 children, the story seems simple. A brave woman, a split-second decision, lives saved. Society wants to believe it. Mothers are protectors. Intruders are villains. But what if the marks on her neck were self-inflicted? What if the intruder never intended harm? And what if the entire terrifying scene, from the unlocked door to 9 bullets fired in darkness, was an elaborate performance to destroy an ex-husband and gain custody? December 13th, 2001 began as an ordinary winter evening in early Iowa, population 600. 35-year-old Tracy Richter was home with her 3 children, 11-year-old Bert from a previous marriage, 3-year-old Noah, and 20-month-old Mason. Her husband, Michael Roberts, was away on a business trip. A friend had visited that afternoon, leaving around 5:15. By all accounts, the evening was unremarkable. Tracy gave Mason a bath, prepared the children for bed, and settled into single parenting. Then, according to her story, the front door burst open. 2 men entered. One wrapped pantyhose around her neck until she lost consciousness. When she came to, she heard Bert screaming. Her glasses were knocked off, leaving her vision blurred. She ran to her bedroom, grabbed a 9mm handgun, and opened fire. When the chaos ended, 20-year-old Dustin Wadey lay dead with 9 gunshot wounds. The second attacker allegedly fled. Officers found a scene that seemed to confirm her account. Tracy had visible injuries. She cried through interviews, explaining how she defended her family. Dustin Wadey was their neighbor, quiet and socially awkward. The sheriff's lieutenant believed her story. Physical evidence seemed consistent, but later discoveries would crack the narrative. In Dustin's car, police found a pink spiral notebook. It contained 5 pages of sloppy handwriting, a supposed confession claiming he had been hired by John Pittman, Tracy's ex-husband, to harm her and Bert. The notebook detailed payments and plans for murder, It seemed to support Tracy's self-defense claim. Instead, it raised questions that remained unanswered for nearly a decade. Tracy had a history with John Pittman, a Virginia plastic surgeon she married in 1988. They divorced in 1996 after a bitter custody dispute. By 2001, Tracy faced another custody battle, threatening her ability to keep Bert and the $1,000 in monthly child support she received. She needed leverage, and the pink notebook provided exactly that. Mary Higgins, a close friend, noticed something off. Tracy recounted the invasion with flat, mechanical detachment. She mentioned the notebook, then instructed Higgins to forget it. Why would proof of her ex-husband's guilt need to be hidden? Years passed. Tracy divorced Michael Roberts in 2008 and returned to her maiden name. The case remained closed as justified homicide. In 2009, a new prosecutor reopened the investigation. They recreated the shooting, analyzing bullet trajectories and blood spatter. Findings contradicted Tracy's story. Dustin's head was on the ground, execution style, when the last bullets were fired. She had fired 9 out of 10 shots with precision despite poor visibility. Marksmanship suggested practice, not panic. Witnesses, including Mary Higgins, were re-interviewed. Higgins revealed the notebook conversations and Tracy's strange behavior. On July 26, 2011, Tracy was arrested in Omaha and charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors alleged she lured Dustin to her home, forced him to write the fabricated notebook entries to frame John Pittman, staged a home invasion, and then shot him 9 times to silence him. The notebook had been planted in his car, ready for discovery. The trial began in October 2011. John Pittman testified he never met Dustin and never hired him. Only Tracy and those close to Pittman knew details in the notebook. Prosecutors highlighted inconsistencies in Tracy's story, forensic evidence contradicting self-defense claims, and the timing just before a custody hearing. Bert testified for the defense, claiming he saw Dustin getting up before Tracy shielded him. Prosecutors suggested he was coached. Jurors noted suspicious behavior. After the shooting, Tracy unloaded a gun on the counter, rather than keeping it ready for protection. On November 7, 2011, the jury convicted Tracy Richter of first-degree murder. She received life without parole, Iowa's harshest penalty. At sentencing, she maintained her innocence, claiming she would rather serve life than lose a child. Dustin's family spoke through tears about the young man whose life was stolen. Tracy appealed, arguing self-defense. In July 2025, the Iowa Court of Appeals upheld the verdict, noting she had clear motive, orchestrated the notebook, and staged evidence. Today, Tracy Richter remains incarcerated. Her case is a disturbing example of how custody battles can escalate into violence. She manipulated a socially awkward young man, exploited his trust, and executed him to serve her purposes. The notebook, meant to protect her, exposed her lies. The 3 children she should have protected were instead witnesses to a murder disguised as heroism.